What's up everyone? In this video I'm going to talk about the Nikon D300s and see if it's still a good camera in 2025 and so on. So the Nikon D300s was released back in July of 2009. It was $1,700 just for the body alone. That's a little over $2,500 in 2025 money. And just for reference, when the Nikon D500 was released, it was $2,000. And now you can find a D300s for well under $200 used. I've seen a few for $150, but that just really depends on the condition it's in too. And I'd say for that price, for under $150 USD, that's a pretty good deal for this camera. And let's just go to the specs of this camera. It has a 12 megapixel CMOS crop sensor. It has 51 autofocus points, and the ISO ranges from 200 to 1600, which can boost up to 6400. Low point 1 is equivalent to ISO 100, but it'd be extremely hard to tell. If you can tell the difference between low point 1 and ISO 200, let me know in the comments, because if you can see here, I can't tell the difference. It also shoots at 7 FPS and up to 8 FPS with a battery grip. It has 2 memory card slots, 1 CF and 1 SD. It has a 3-inch LCD screen, and it does do video recording. The D300S does do video recording. The D300 non-S does not do video recording. So let's talk about the pros about this camera. One of the things I really like about this camera is how it's built. When you have it in your hands, you definitely feel a lot more confidence. The autofocus is actually really quick, and I think it still holds up to today's modern mirrorless cameras too. But just make sure you get familiar with the autofocus settings on this camera, because it is a much higher, I guess I would say it's a more of a pro camera versus a entry-level, mid-level camera like the D7000s. Another great thing I like about this camera too is the low light isn't too bad. I think ISO 2000 is pretty usable. I think above ISO 2000, you're gonna get some grain. For the image quality is usable, but it just really depends how much light you're working with. Another great thing I do like about this camera is the professional settings. So if you're familiar with the acronyms and camera settings, this is the camera to get. I personally like the pro settings on this and how the buttons are laid out. It's very nice to make changes on the go. The top panel is nice to see what your settings are. And if you're a new photographer, I would highly recommend reviewing the Nikon D300S's manual to see what each button does. You can find the manual online on Nikon's website too. Another great thing about this camera is the great battery life. I've taken this out on automotive events for like 6 to 8 hours, and I've only gone through one battery, and that was during like a really hot day. So it's really nice. I know that my Nikon Z6 batteries, they only last about 4 to 5 hours, just because electronic viewfinder, and it's basically all electronic, versus where the D300S, you're using an optical view, so it's not using as much battery. Another reason why I do like this camera too is that it does have video recording. It is okay. The video recording is okay, but it is the Achilles heel of this camera. While it does have video recording, it is also not the best video autofocus performing camera. And we'll get to that later too. And here's just a quick clip of the HD sample. This is 1280 by 720, which is the highest video format the D300S can do. Another great thing I like about this camera is the autofocus screw. So if you have this autofocus screw, you can utilize the older Nikon AFD screw lenses or the older lenses that have the screw drive like this.
There were families on that train.
So let's just talk about the cons of this camera. These are just things I don't think the D300S does really well for me. For others, it might be perfectly fine. And just getting straight to it is the horrible autofocus for video. I would not rely on this camera to do fast autofocus for videos, especially if you're trying to record fast moving subjects like people moving around or moving from side to side coming towards you. It is not a good camera for that. It will really struggle. While the video does have contrast detection and live view mode, you will not be able to make or see the adjustments you make when you're changing the shutter speed or aperture, like here. The only changes you can see is when you're making adjustments to the exposure value, the EV, this button right here. But that's about it. That's one of the cons I have about the D300S, is that you're really limited on making changes when you're recording videos. So adding on to the poor video performance is also the lack of stabilization. The D300S does not have IBIS, in-body image stabilization. So if you're looking for a camera that will be smooth for video recording, this is not the camera to get. Even with the VR lens, it's not stable when you're using a zoom lens, as you can see here. And the best way to get a stable footage is just to use a tripod. That's the best tip I can give you if you want stable footage and you don't want shaky footage. If you're attempting to vlog, an ultra wide lens is okay. I think it's alright, but you'll still get some shake, as you can see here. Hope this is in focus. This is with the Sigma 10-20 on the D300s. I personally like the wide angle view for, especially if you're vlogging, that way you can kind of see where you're at. I'm in the shade right now. I'm just going to the sun and see how the D300S's video does with the sun on the lens. So you can see here, I'm pressing the autofocus button and it is still pretty good. It's not too bad. It's really cold. Also, if you're recording video, the rolling shutter is very visible too, as you can see here, for example. And the microphone isn't all that good. I would highly recommend getting a external mic for it. Here's one with the external mic. All right, so I have the 10. As you can see here, I'm gonna go to 10, all the way to 20. 10. So I have the mic on. I'm gonna see if I can try the autofocus real quick, because I can't see if I'm in focus or not, but here it is with the 10-20 on the D300S for vlogging. And here's one without the external mic.
I don't know if it's good. I don't even know if I'm in focus. This is just a regular mic from the D300S. I'm just going to walk, just see how stable it is. I know my Z50 doesn't have IBIS, but this, as you can see, I don't know, it's probably pretty shaky. I'm really hoping that it can catch me talking if you're vlogging. So this is just a sample test. It is like -10 degrees right now, and this is the vlogging style with the D300S. I'm going to press the autofocus button again and hope I am in focus. This is at 18mm with an 18-55. Check that out.
And just another bad thing about this camera is just the low light performance. As I said earlier, anything above ISO 2000 is going to get pretty grainy. So if you plan on using this camera for low light situations, it's not bad, but above ISO 2000 it's going to get really grainy. So how does this D300S compare to the D7000? The D7000 is one camera that a lot of people kind of compare this camera to because it was officially replacing the D300S. The D7000, while I think it's an excellent camera, it still holds up pretty well, but the D300S is just right next to it. And depending on the condition it's in, you can find these two right around the same price too. But I have seen the D7000 and D300S prices just about the same. And if we're looking at the overall tech features between the two, the D7000 is technically better. And we can look at them here as the specs. The D300S was released back in July of 2009. And then a few months later, the D7000 was released in September of 2010. The D300S has 12.3 megapixels, whereas the D7000 has 16.2 megapixels. The D300S does have more autofocus points at 51, and the D7000 had 39 autofocus points. The ISO range with the D300S is from 200 to 3200 with a boost to 6400. And as you can see here, the D7000 does have a higher and better low light performance with the ISO ranging from 100 to 6400 with a boost up to 25,600. So it is a significantly better for low light. So if you want a better low light performer, the D7000 is better. As for FPS, the D300S is a little faster with 7 FPS versus the D7000's 6 FPS. And as for video resolution, Nikon didn't really focus too much on video autofocus performance, but at least you have video, right? So the D300S does 1280 by 720 at its highest quality versus the D7000's better video resolution at 1920 at 1080. So between the two, if you're looking for a crispier video footage, the D7000 would be the camera to get. The autofocus performance is just not that good. Both of them do have a 3-inch LCD screen. As I said earlier, I think both cameras are great, but I don't think you can go wrong with either. It just depends on your budget. Personally, I like the D300S's button layout compared to the D7000s. Personally, I would choose the D300S over the D7000 just because I like the customizable controls and button settings. So if I am on a automotive track day or sports event, I'm taking the D300S over the D7000. But the D7000's low light performance is a lot better, so that just really depends on what you prefer. So as for image quality, the D300S still holds up really well. When you're reviewing the image quality from the LCD, it's okay. Mine is beginning to show some age. image because the colors aren't accurate, but when I view on my computer, it's perfectly fine. And as for sharpness, it just depends what lens you're using too. Personally, I love using the Tamron 45 1.8. The sharpness just really depends on your settings. So if you understand the exposure triangle, you can get really sharp images from it. I have done a portraits video with the D300s in my channel, so check that out as well. So overall, if you're on a budget, the D300s is an excellent camera to get, especially if you're looking for a second camera body. I've been seeing a lot under $200, and that just really depends on the condition it's in. I think I've seen better ones for about the $300 range, but I've seen ones that are decent condition under $200, and I've seen well-used ones for well under $150. And I think anything lower than that, you'll see some blemishes on the camera, and you know, it might not be in the best shape. Like the rubbers might be falling apart. For sports or fast action, I think this camera is where it really shines. I usually bring this D300s for track days just because I like the extra reach. And if you're looking for making adjustments on the go, the D300s is a lot better compared to the D7000. So if you are switching from the D7000 to the D300, it is kind of a learning curve just because the buttons aren't, you know, where they should be. And I think if you're doing wildlife, as long as you have a lot of light you're working with, I think you should be fine if you understand what settings you're using. There's a lot of great examples from the D300s on Flickr where you can find amazing images from the D300s with wildlife. I think if you're doing weddings with this camera, I think you'll be perfectly fine, especially if you, again, understand the exposure triangle. And again, you just have to get yourself familiar with the autofocus settings too. So how good is the Nikon D300s? I still think it's an amazing camera to use, especially if you're looking for an awesome performing DSLR on a budget. And also remember, it only took Nikon 7 years to replace the D300s with the D500. Sure, we can say that the D7000 series cameras did take over the D300 cameras, but I think the D300 cameras just had a more professional button layout to it. The D7000 series cameras were made for enthusiasts, whereas the D300 and D500 were made more for professionals. And it just shows just because of the button layout. And I think in 2025, the D300s is probably one camera most new photographers won't get just because of how bulky it is now. And I think it's a camera that really does test your knowledge as a photographer. You really do have to understand what settings you want and what kind of autofocus settings you want to get the shots you need. That's my take on the D300s. If you do have this camera, please leave a comment below and let others know what you think about it. It's an amazing camera to use still in 2025 and so on. I just want to say thanks if you're watching this, and if this video did help, please like and subscribe because it does help my channel grow. I just want to say thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, again, I'll try my best to answer. Thanks for watching, everyone. See ya. See, my left hand's already tired, but put it on my right hand now, go into the shade, and I really hope the settings kind of change by itself here. I don't think the video autofocusing is, I don't think the autofocus is actually functioning on the D300s because you have to manually press the button to autofocus. So here, let me try this again. Autofocus here. I really hope my face is in focus.